Good evening, ladies and germs. Welcome back to another edition of the Sarah Rants About Shit Show. You know how I love to bring you just interesting things that I find. Kind of off the beaten path type stuff because I'm just a weirdo. But I try to use it to everyone's benefit. And tonight we have something extra fun, which is Miss Abby Cox, the costume historian, who is going to lead us through the woolly woods of the sort of lay woman's understanding of modern feminism. Here we go. All right, first she has to do her disclaimers because she's going to spend the entire video talking about women's lives in the 19th century. But first she has to do her gender disclaimers. Here we go.
And as a quick note, I'm going to try, as always, to keep modern discussions of gender as neutral and as inclusive as possible. But when speaking about the past, I'm going to be using more heavily gendered language since it was a language they used and had access to at the time. Also,
that's an arbitrary distinction, right? I mean, we're going to spend the entire video in the past, so it's kind of immaterial, right? Boy.
I'm going to be speaking largely about Anglo-American history with a bit of French history too. This discussion is by no means globally inclusive because, as we all know, many societies and cultures outside of Western Europe and colonized North America understood and accepted that gender was fluid.
Yeah, right. Abby. Oh, come on. Yeah, because the poor indigenous peoples didn't understand men and women and how all that worked until the big evil white man came along and taught it all to them and indoctrinated them. Right?
Further, I don't speak about what I don't know about, and since my scholarly work has always focused on Anglo-American with some French and rarely Scandinavian histories, that's just what I stick to. Finally, I won't be speaking about men in the past dressing as women. This ranty McRant rant is focused on the female character and the female experience in the past.
See? So why did we have to say all that? I don't know. Poor woman has to justify herself on her own channel, for heaven's sake. Okay, but now that she said all of that, she's going to pretty much immediately contradict herself like 2 minutes later and say a bunch of really gender-critical sounding stuff. But first, point of order, and it's my turn to be like nitpicky here, but like I'm not a programmer, but I've known many. And see this right here at the bottom, that slash means end of line. So what you've got there is end sarcasm. Anyway, let's hear what she has to say.
I can't. It's so stupid. Even though, obviously, in the real world, the whole concept doesn't make any sense, and that we, as individuals, are all completely unique and different, and toxic gender norms are horrific, and they need to be thrown into a volcano.
Yeah. Okay. So, I don't know if that was part of her disclaimers still, really. I don't know. And here we have Gollum for whatever reason. But like, that's exactly what gender criticism is. What she just said about how, toxic gender norms need to get thrown away. Yep. Ladies and gentlemen, I found the turf. And now she's going to point out for us the troubling, I guess, regression, frankly, in historical costume dramas of using like masculine attire as kind of shorthand for, the woman who is cool and forward-thinking, which is gross, of course.
Women have been fighting the patriarchy for centuries, and while rejecting traditional gender norms of their era happened, that doesn't mean it can only be expressed in the rejection of distinctly feminine articles of clothing like skirts and corsets in preference for traditionally masculine garments like trousers. There are plenty of women who were feminists pious feminists over the past several hundred years who still wore corsets, skirts, enjoyed the rustle of silk, and invested in the best quality lace that they could afford.
Yeah. It's almost like the two aren't mutually exclusive, right? You know, there's this argument about makeup going around, and personally, I think that it's a really hefty tool that we can and should utilize in our current, situation. But there's nothing wrong with actually enjoying anything associated with femininity, because believing that would obviously be just a giant piece of internalized misogyny.
When we look at images of famous feminists in history, many of them are dressed in the fashions of the era that they're living in. Even like the OG feminist herself, Mary Wollstonecraft.
I'm putting aside the pronunciation of poor Mary's name. Yeah. But what I really wanted to talk about tonight is Abby's take on bloomers, which most of us are probably familiar with, but just real quick. Well, I mean, she explains it. And we'll let her do it, because she's the costume historian, right? Why would I do that? I almost forgot about this. This is great.
Gentleman Jack is a good example of this, and we'll address that later. I'm frustrated by the reliance of girly, bad, clothing defaults that our feminist characters are shoved into without what seems to be a second thought on how problematic it can actually be.
I don't know. I think arguably that would be a reflection of, the direction that society's gone in the last few decades. I don't know. Okay, here we go about Amelia Bloomer. Jeez.
Eccentric forms of dressing, and by not operating within a broader social acceptability, how can this character actually make any sort of progress towards equality?
Okay, so I want to jump
Love
in here
and
interrupt myself because of a couple things. One, I am sure already within someone watching this video and they've reached this point, they're wondering why I haven't mentioned bloomers and Amelia Bloomer. And two, I thought that actually this point, sorry, I just kicked the tripod, that this point would actually be a good point to actually talk about bloomers and Amelia Bloomer and like that whole fashion movement that happened in the 1850s that was very, very brief. The reason
Okay, so it was a brief fashion movement that happened in the 1850s, which is, a million years ago, right? For 5 minutes. But I think that what she's about to say about it really, really, really directly applies to modern feminism and how we want to move forward with, frankly, we need to convert people, right? If we want to win, we need to win everyone over.
I originally didn't want to bring it up in this video is because of some very personal, just kind of biases towards it. It just gets brought up a lot when people talk about feminism and
that is so funny.
And clothing in the 19th century, and
it's so true.
It's just kind of me being like, I don't want to talk about it. And I also just kind of hate the 1850s just as an aesthetic period, so I'm never really that interested in studying it. However, for this discussion, it is important is that it was a very brief moment in sartorial history. It obviously happened in the United States. It was tied into women's rights at the time. However, it was a failure. And it was a failure because of the points that I'm making in this video.
Okay. She's definitely right about that, right? Because no one remembers the time in the 19th century when women all of a sudden just started wearing pants. No, that was 100 years later, right? In the 40s, the 1940s. So it didn't work because it was against the grain, which is my wording, not hers. But what I'm trying to get at here is that we should learn from our failures. Okay. We should take ownership of these things and learn from them, take ownership of the lessons that they present, the pretty obvious lessons that they present, which she is about to explain.
They were too contrarian. They were too shocking. They disrupted the whole system and culture and society, and so people didn't take them seriously. So I've been going through and like reading newspaper
It made it
articles
easy to write them
from
off.
the 1850s talking about what's going on. And what is interesting is that when these newspapers are talking about Amelia Bloomer, Susan B. Anthony, and other women as a part of this reform movement, they don't actually ever talk about their points or the messages that they stand for politically.
Yeah. Yeah. Does that sound familiar? Do you feel that in your soul? Because I do. Because no one is talking about any of the stuff that we're actually saying, are they? What? Come on. Oh no.
Etc. What they talk about is what they're wearing. Specifically the bloomer outfits with the tunics and the trousers. And so it's kind of, they've gotten attention, but it wasn't the attention that they wanted. It wasn't the attention that worked. And this is actually one of the reasons that I can understand why Susan B. Anthony stopped wearing this outfit, is that it was distracting from the actual message and the actual intention behind what she wanted to promote, what she wanted people to understand.
Right. So you have to be flexible with your methods because the message is the point.
And so going through these articles, and yes, they're written by men, and yes, they're really awful and gross, and I'm not arguing that point, but my point is that this whole contrarian idea, it doesn't work in this society. You have to fit in and then make changes. And so this whole bloomer thing is a perfect example of that. Here's
something about winning hearts and minds, right? I mean, we've seen politics done. Not that we need to become politicians because you don't want to sell your soul. But you can't just assume that your being right is going to be enough.
Here's an example of how distracting they actually were, and how these clothes actually turned them into a, for lack of a better term, a bit of a freak show.
And this is the point she's going to make right here, which is context is I have a saying, context is king. I don't want to be sexist, but metaphorically speaking, context can and often does change the meaning of everything.
In New England American society, as well as in the UK, because they went over there as well. In this Brooklyn Daily Eagle, 4th of February, 1853, they write, among the strong-minded women, air quotes by them, who met in Albany week before last,
like my granny mug.
The convention was Mrs. Amelia Bloomer, the lady who goes in for breeches and buncombe.
Oh, and okay. I don't know why I know this, but I recognize that word. Bunkum. It's bunkum. Here, let's see. Look. Dated, informal. Nonsense. Pants and nonsense. I don't know. It sounds like everything sounds like a fun band name to me. I don't know.
During her stay at the Capitol, she called on a tailor and got measured for 3 pair of tight-fitting cashmere trousers. The tape, which he took her dimensions, is kept in a glass case and exhibited to bachelors at a shilling a sight.
Ew.
So this tailor took her measure, had the tape, and if you guys don't know what tailor's tape is, it's long pieces of paper that have cuts and notches taken out of it to denote certain points of measurement. So instead of using like numerical measurements, they use this code basically on paper. It's much easier to work with, by the way. He took her tape and he put it on display to make money off of. That's how shocking she was. That's how,
and how gross the attitudes were at the time. Ew.
It's kind of like getting famous for the wrong reasons, I think, is really the thing. And I could see...
Like interfacing with the system in the wrong way. I would say more accurately.
Where at this point in time, the original idea, like, of creating the bloomers and the trousers could have come from this very, like, genuine place of, like, I want something more
Right.
free around my legs. I want to be able to run and move and go
They
about
were
my
right.
life without having to deal with all these
But
skirts
it
around
didn't
my
matter.
legs. And I see that is fair. And I could see where initially getting the attention could be viewed as maybe this is actually a good thing. Oh, we're getting notoriety. Oh, we're getting in the newspaper. People are talking about us. But then when they're not making headway and people are not moving past their clothing, then the message of equality is lost. And so I was reading a Vanity Fair article about it, and like how Susan B. Anthony made this realization, and she stopped wearing the outfit and she started wearing just a red silk shawl.
Obviously, she wore actual clothes with the shawl, but you get what I mean.
Like her iconic piece of wear, and like that's how you recognized her. And it was a much
Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know this about Susan B. Anthony because every picture I've ever seen of her was in black and white. But it reminded me actually of the thing that Contrapoint said that we watched the other week about if you can't be beautiful, then maybe you can, cultivate a style and, create the taste with which you are to be enjoyed, was the quote from some poet or something. I'm not, I don't, poetry is just a bridge too far for me. But anyway, that's exactly what this is, right? Susan B. Anthony was like cultivating a style, an iconic style, for herself. And creating the context in which she was to be, appreciated. Right? I guess so you would say that is what strong people do.
more powerful sartorial statement than the bloomers were, and she veered away from that. So I just think that
because power is having the effect that you desire, right? Not just having a large effect. It's being able to direct what happens, right?
The bloomers thing, it's like, I know it's something that people like to hold on to because it's this interesting point in history, and I've been rambling about this for 7 minutes now. But I think actually what it does is it proves the point of this contrary, not like other girls issue that is actually, it just doesn't fit within the context of history and the female experience within history.
The Western Euro-American experience. The white girl has to clarify that she is speaking for white girls. Which, the fact that she does this repeatedly is very, very fun because of something that she gets to at the end, but we will get to that in a minute.
History and it speaks to how important clothing is, and these bloomers is a good example of how it just didn't work.
Right, and it didn't work, I think, because maybe of the inherent misogyny in the idea that in order to be more free and forward-thinking, we need to be more like men.
But 40 years later, we have split skirts being sold in delineator magazines, people making them at home, or wearing knickers, or, oh God, I'm spacing on what they're actually
knickerbockers
for something, for golf and sport. I have a riding habit that has tight-fitting woolen trousers underneath the skirt for riding. It's not like women didn't wear bifurcated garments in the 19th century.
Right, for their own practical purposes. Not as a middle finger to the male establishment.
It's just within the context of how they wore them that matters. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Context.
I'll talk about that in a moment. So basically, bloomers, they didn't work. They didn't work for a reason. They didn't work for the reasons I'm talking about here. Historically, we see women in higher social positions and broad social acceptability having room to be...
Oh, yeah. Oh, this is so great. She goes immediately into just slaying the myth of white feminism and how evil that is and exclusionary. Which, again, I'm sorry to be so pedantic with the language tonight, but I am a writer after all at heart. And what is with this word exclusionary? Because does it not mean exactly the same as exclusive? But exclusive has positive connotations, right? Because an exclusive club is one you want to be in. So let's listen now while Abby explains to us why it was a lot of the time white upper class women who tended to do a lot of the early feminist stuff, shall we?
Be more eccentric in their dress, behaviors, and pursue progressive agendas. Once the upper classes accepted these fashions or viewpoints, behaviors, ideals, etc., its acceptability could and actually would trickle down to the middle and lower classes. An example of this are the Paddle Sisters, who were notorious for their artistic and eccentric friends. They wore clothing that they created themselves that went against traditional feminine clothing standards at the time. It wasn't masculine clothing that they were wearing. They were just designing their own kind of scandalous dresses. And they pursued their own artistic and creative endeavors. And one of these sisters was actually Julia Margaret Cameron, one of the first female photographers whose work is literally the stuff cottage fairy and royal court dreams are made of. I love Julia Margaret Cameron.
That's cool, right?
I love it. Love it. Oh, so good. While they were eccentric and known to be eccentric, their social position gave them the space to be this way. And thus it opened doors for other women in lower social classes in the future. As much as...
Ding, ding, ding. Yeah. And I think that would be more the identity social side of feminism. And, a lot of what I try to stick to is more the material political side of feminism. There's woman's social role versus woman's material reality and needs. It's kind of two arms of the liberation fight thing, whatever. Anyway, you see what I'm saying. But she makes a really good point here, and I think just completely explains away the specter of white feminism, which you would think I would be an expert in, being a white feminist. But, I spent actually years off and on wondering what in the hell exactly that was. And was very confused to discover eventually that they just meant, feminism. But it goes along with the whole sex as a colonial construct thing, right? If you can paint this stuff as problematic, then it can be just sort of disregarded. And we don't get to learn from our history.
Just class and...
Oh, no, yeah. And then she's going to go on about Anne of Green Gables for like 10 minutes. It's great. But we're going to skip all of that and get right to Abby's lovely conclusion, which just really encapsulates the vapidity and sort of disguised misogyny of identity politics and, modern liberal feminism. Listen to her contradict herself.
So yeah, as much as I love and appreciate and am grateful for the resurgence of historic costume dramas, retellings, remakes, and original stories, I just want to beg the writers and designers to stop playing into this not like other girls trope for the progressive female protagonists. It's lazy and harmful storytelling with its implication that all other girls are inherently not feminists and desire equality. Let us explore.
Poor thing. And it just sort of is the box that we're all pushed into, right? It's a very sort of flat, symbolic representation of that box. In the historical costume dramas are, in Bridgerton was, I guess, like overtly, blatantly in your face about it. Just kind of a fantasy of, well, wouldn't this be nice if the past had been like that, and how romantical and everything, because, you can't recreate the past, and it's never going to be, you know, some of them try for accuracy. And then there's, of course, Marie Antoinette by Sofia Coppola that famously didn't really try for historical accuracy and more for the feeling of the events and stuff. Which, you know, it's a movie, so arguably valid. I've grown to hate that word, but I'm using it anyway. And just Miss Abby here has done an amazing job of walking us around the circle of the circular logic to a lot of the liberal feminist attitudes right now, right? Because she's going to be okay, despite the fact that she said all that turfy stuff. I mean, partly because she is who she is, and she's so darn adorable. But also because she said all the right magic words, didn't she? Actually, at one point, she goes on for a couple of minutes referring to George Sand as they, which, like, I feel for a 19th century French woman would have been very strange. Indeed. But that aside, it's so frustrating because, you know, she's a very smart lady with a lot of, you know, who's very educated and has a lot of knowledge on a lot of things relating to women's history. And that gives her a really informed and interesting perspective on a lot of things. And then it's got this veneer of bullshit. Ew. You know. Ew. Oh, we gotta love her, you know. And I wanted to bring this to you all, just because I found it so very interesting, and I hope that you did too. So, you know, like the video if you found it interesting, and subscribe to the channel for more stuff like this. Well, you know, I don't know if there's anything like this, but that's kind of the point. You know, I think I see feminism just everywhere at this point in my life. So I can squeeze feminist analysis out of some interesting things. And I just have so much fun doing it. And I hope you have fun coming along with us on this little journey through the murky waters of feminism. And I guess I'll see you next time. I'm going to go find some more stuff to bitch about. Bye.